problem comes from the practice test. It's number 1, and it's looking at Le Chatelier's principle and how an equilibrium between carbon monoxide and oxygen, making carbon dioxide, would change if certain stresses are imposed upon the system. So A says, which way will the equilibrium shift if oxygen is removed? So if O2 is removed, that's like a balancing act between the products and the reactants. So if we take away the O2, this equilibrium is going to shift towards that O2. It's going to try and replace the oxygen that was removed. And so if we remove oxygen, then the equilibrium will shift to replace the oxygen, and that's toward the reactants, or what you might call to the left. So O2 is removed, it's going to shift towards the reactants. Which way will the equilibrium shift if carbon monoxide is added? And so B asks, what would happen if we add more CO? Well, now, in this balancing act, we've overweighted this side, so it's going to shift things towards the products. So if carbon monoxide is added, you have to use up that extra CO. And so that's going to lead to the equilibrium shifting toward the products. Yeah, I guess you can read that. All right, C, which way will the equilibrium shift if carbon dioxide is removed? So just like we saw when the oxygen was removed, if you take away something, the equilibrium is going to try and replace that thing that was removed. So on C, if CO2 is removed, then it's going to shift toward the product. All right, D, which way will the equilibrium shift if temperature is increased? And I, when I wrote the balanced equation, did not include energy, and so we'll just say heat. Heat belonged on the reactant side. So D, which way will the equilibrium shift if temperature is increased? Well, that would be the same as adding heat. So if we add heat to the system, that is going to shift the equilibrium. So it's going to try and use up that extra heat. So it's going to consume the extra heat and some CO and some O2, and it's going to produce more of the products. So then if temp is increased, it is going to shift toward the products. E, which way will the equilibrium shift if the pressure is decreased? So pressure, that will affect gases, and all 3 species here are gases. And so if we increase the pressure, it's going to force the system to try and take up less space. And since there are 2 moles of carbon monoxide and 1 mole of oxygen, this side has 3 moles of gas, and the product side only has 2 moles of gas. So the side that takes up less space are the products. So E, increasing the pressure, is going to push it towards the side that takes up less space, and that's going to be the products. So toward the products. And that's the last shifting one. So then we start with F. It asks, how will the concentration of oxygen change if CO2 is removed? So if I remove some CO2, that's going to shift the equilibrium, just like we saw in C. Removing CO2 is going to shift it towards the products. We're going to try and replace that thing that we removed. And in order to replace that CO2, we're going to have to use up the carbon monoxide and the oxygen gas. So F, removing CO2, would cause the concentration of oxygen gas to decrease. G, how will the concentration of carbon monoxide change if CO2 is added? So if we would add more carbon dioxide, the equilibrium is going to use up that CO2 and it would shift towards the reactants. Since carbon monoxide is a reactant, there is going to be more carbon monoxide after adding more CO2 than before, so G would cause the concentration of carbon monoxide to increase. And then what do we have left? H and I. We can fit that on the board. H, how will the concentration of carbon monoxide change if temperature is increased? Well, we saw before in D that if temperature is increased, it's going to try and use up that extra heat and shift towards the products. And that means that if we're shifting towards the products, we're going to get more CO2, less oxygen, less carbon monoxide. So increasing the temperature is going to cause the concentration of carbon monoxide to decrease. And lastly, I. How will the concentration of oxygen change if pressure is increased? Increasing pressure is going to shift it towards the side that takes up less space. That we identified earlier as being the products. And if it is shifting towards the products, that means more CO2 and less O2. So the concentration of oxygen is going to decrease. All right, so there is some Le Chatelier principle and the reasoning behind it.